Hello, everyone. Today, we are joined by Mr. Terry Milewski, an award winning Canadian journalist whose fearless investigative reporting has spanned 5 decades across global conflict zones and political controversies. He first visited India as a student in 1967, interviewing Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Since then, he has returned to India for 4 decades as correspondent for CBC News. A distinguished veteran of CBC News, he has covered some of the most consequential stories of our time, from the bombing of Air India Flight 182 to political summits and insurgencies across Asia and the Middle East. He was CBC's first Middle East bureau chief in 1986 and recipient of the Gemini Award for his coverage of the 1997 APEC Summit. In 2020, his explosive report for the McDonnell Laurier Institute Khalistan, a project of Pakistan, challenged mainstream narratives around the separatist Khalistan movement, arguing that it has evolved into a geopolitical proxy sustained by foreign actors, primarily Pakistan's ISI, finding a dangerous new life in diaspora politics. His latest book, Blood for Blood 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Project, is a meticulously documented account of the rise, spread, and transformation of the Khalistan movement, tracing its path from militant voice in the 1980s to narrative warfare, soft lobbying, and diasporic manipulation today. With tensions between India and Canada now at a historic low following the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and diplomatic rupture that followed, Mr. Milewski's insights could not be more relevant. We speak with him today not only about history, but about what happens when extremism crosses borders and meets silence. Welcome, sir.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, sir. So, sir, my first question is, sir, in your 2020 report for McDonnell Laurier Institute, you made a bold argument that the Khalistan movement today is no longer a grassroots Sikh struggle, but a geopolitical project advanced by Pakistan's ISI. What evidence led you to this conclusion, and what changed in your understanding of the movement over time?
Well, the facts on this have been quite overwhelming for a long time. And it was surprising to me that the article was controversial, as though it was something that should not be said or something that was not for polite company. But if you look at the facts, there's only one place from which armed incursions into Indian Punjab occurred during the armed insurgency of the Khalistan movement in the 1980s and early 90s, and that was Pakistan. Add to that the fact that there's only one country to which suspects in the Air India bombing of 1985, which you mentioned, fled when the police got too close in Canada, as they closed in first on his bomb maker, Inderjit Rayat. The leader of the bomb plot, Talvinder Singh Parmar, fled Canada at night and turned up in Pakistan, where he lived most of the rest of his life for the last 3 years of his life, and was, when he was killed by police in India, in Punjab, in 92, he was in the company of 2 Pakistani agents. And there's much more, of course, including the provision of funds in one case, a notorious case that was prosecuted by the FBI in New York. But those are the bare bones of it, that time and again, it turns out that leading Khalistanis had safe haven in Pakistan and were welcomed in Pakistan, and to a degree still are. This doesn't mean that it's entirely, I didn't say that it was bought and paid for. It was simply a Pakistan operation. They hired a few actors to pretend otherwise, but rather that Pakistan is a nation state, as we've all noticed in the past couple of weeks, with nuclear weapons, and it only has to look the other way and to allow people to carry on their activities if they wish on Pakistani territory. They don't have to do much more, And the Khalistan movement, for example, I believe is self-financing. I don't think Pakistan pays for it. I think they have the money they need anyway. But they do have somewhere they can go when trouble hits, and it's Pakistan.
That's quite a compelling case of foreign intelligence manipulation. So, sir, this brings us to our second question. Sir, why has Canada in particular become such a fertile ground for this movement? What political, legal, or cultural factors have enabled Khalistan separatists to gain legitimacy in parts of the diaspora despite their violent pasts?
Well, first, of course, Canada has always had a quite a liberal immigration policy and was chosen, an English-speaking country, was chosen as a member of the Commonwealth, a place which was well known to many Indians, and where immigration was relatively easy, even for those who might have suspicions in their backgrounds of Khalistani activity. Canada was convenient. Canada was forgiving. Canada didn't look too closely at your background. And number two, even when it did look at your background, Canada never had any particular objection to people from any nation, anywhere in the world, flying their flag for the independence of their particular people, from the Kurds, the Palestinians, to the Khalistanis, whoever. And they regarded, as long as it was peaceful, such activities as free speech, that it's not illegal in Canada to walk down the street with a yellow flag and saying Khalistan Zindabad. It's always been that way. And not many Canadians would like to give up that freedom of speech by banning people carrying on such demonstrations, otherwise harmless demonstrations, at the risk to Canadian freedoms. And although India has always objected to what Canada finds tolerable and earnestly has besought Canada to do something about it, ban these people, throw them out of the country, throw them in jail, whatever, for many years, Canadian governments of all stripes, conservative or liberal, have turned them down. And said, until you show us evidence that they've done harm, actual physical harm to somebody, then we're not going to do your bidding in our country. So it's become very easy for Khalistanis to settle here, and they're here mainly in not just as a safe haven or as refugees from Indian justice in some cases, but also for economic reasons. Canada is a wealthy country. They can get a job tomorrow. There's an installed base, if you will, of established Indian expatriates. We're going on 2 million Canadians of Indian extraction. Of those, about 750,000 are Sikh. So any Sikh in particular. So that's double their proportion in the Indian population, for example. They're proportionately more in the Canadian population. So they have a convenient safe haven in Canada, and it's been easy up until now for militant Khalistanis, a small minority within the Indian diaspora. It's been easy for them to gather supporters and to stay just this side of Canadian law. Although in some cases, people like me, I for one would argue that the law has been too liberal. For example, in the cases of, for example, parades featuring life-size posters of known Khalistani terrorists. These are people who have not confined their activities to freedom of speech, but also to freedom of action. That is to say, carrying out actual terrorist attacks, including the worst in Canadian history. That is the bombing of Air India in 1985. 331 people wiped out for no reason at all, mostly Canadians of Indian descent. So the worship and glorification of characters like Parmar and others who took part in terrorist actions, that, to me, is going too far. I would agree with the Indian side on that question. But so far, they keep it up, and the politicians in Canada, they don't mind, because these people can organize support at election time. They're clever and skilled at working the Canadian political system. So they will say to members of parliament in Canada, look, if you sing our song, or if you just look the other way at our parades, when you see the posters of Parmar in the Vaisakhi parade, for example, or hanging on the outside of an important Gurdwara in British Columbia, then if you just look the other way, well, we can organize a lot of votes for you. But if you don't, we can organize those votes for the other guy. Which do you choose? And so far, a lot of them have chosen the former.
Yes, and back in India, we also see visuals of glorification of terrorists involved in airline bombing or celebrating the assassination of Indira Gandhi during the parades. India time and again has raised objection regarding this, but Canada chose to do nothing. So
yeah, and they could easily do that, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I said already that I supported the Indian side on this question. That's a good example, the glorification of the assassination of Indira Gandhi. The first example, the Air India bombing, of course, is mass murder, the worst mass murder in Canadian history. And the assassination of Indira Gandhi is an example of a particular murder which they endorse. They are explicitly endorsing a political murder in that case. And it doesn't seem to be beyond the bounds of possibility that even if Canadian politicians don't want to ban speech, even if they are free speech absolutists, and they say, well, they're not murdering anyone, they're just endorsing murder. Well, even so, if you're not going to ban them, why do you necessarily have to approve them? Why can you not boycott their parades if they're going to have Parmar's poster or the Indira Gandhi's assassin, or the assassins of General Vajra, or the assassins of Bayant Singh in Punjab, the Chief Minister of Punjab, and so on and so on. You don't have to endorse these things. You could say no. You could say, I'm not going to have anything to do with it. And you can threaten me that you will organize votes for the other guy. Well, I'm going to go to my political opponent and say and expect him and accuse him of endorsing this if he doesn't reject it. So you could fight back if you want to restrict it to just call it free speech. You can fight back. You have your own freedom of speech. You can talk back. You can argue, but they seem very unwilling to do so. If I may, I'm sorry to go on, but this is an important question that you asked. I mentioned one other thing. There's one Liberal member of Parliament, so he's a member of the governing party, recently re-elected in Canada, Sukh Dhaliwal from Surrey Newton. And Mr. Dhaliwal recently organized a petition using the website of Canada's House of Commons to proselytize, to try to gather signatures for a petition to be presented to Parliament calling for a new inquiry into the question of whether the Indian government itself blew up its own plane in 1985. The Khalistanis didn't do it. Now, this is an old piece of nonsense which ignores abundant, conclusive evidence on who actually did it. We already know that. But they try to keep this lie alive in order to give them something to say when people say, you shouldn't glorify Talvinder Parmar, the Air India bomber. And then they say, but he was innocent. He was wrongly accused. Oh, really? Yes, the Indian government blew up their own plane. Well, this is in conflict with about 1,000 facts, abundant hard evidence. But Mr. Dhaliwal still thinks it's worth trying to keep this lie alive, despite the number of times it has been debunked. But I have to tell you, and this is why I mentioned this, that in 4 months of effort of trying to get signatures just on the internet, you didn't have to go anywhere to vote. You just get online and go click. That's all you have to do. Easy. And in 4.5 months of effort, he managed to get 4,000 signatures. So it's microscopic. You know, there are 750,000 Sikhs in Canada, and he managed to get, with all of that effort and the parliamentary website giving him free publicity, and he got 4,000 signatures. It was a pitiful result, suggesting that maybe there's 1% of the Sikhs out there who will play along with this sort of nonsense, and nonsense is what it is. So that gives you a sense of what the real picture is when the Khalistanis say, as they often do, that we speak for the Sikhs. We are the authentic voice of the Sikhs. And when you condemn Khalistanis, you're anti-Sikh. And if that's the case, I guess most of the Sikhs in Canada are anti-Sikh then. So it's an absurd situation. And I personally see very little likelihood that it's going to change, which is a pity.
Yeah, I mean, we saw what happened after the killing of terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
But I'm saying to you that many Indians do take the position that you took in your question, that this was a terrible thing that Trudeau did. And I would simply return the other question: would you rather, if the shoe were on the other foot, would you, if you were prime minister and you discovered such a plot, would you keep silent and allow another country to commit murder on your soil, even if they had a very good case? Up until that point, it does not seem to me that India had crossed that line. All of the wrong acts were on the Khalistani side. The attack on various critics who were nearly beaten to death in at least 2 cases. The attack on some of the witnesses in the Air India plot, who were in fact killed in at least 2 cases. And the explosion of the aircraft itself, and many other crimes. It was all on the Khalistani side. And people like me could look at that and say, well, this is a clear-cut case. Now, I think you can make an argument that the government of India may have, and they have not refuted the evidence produced by the Americans, by the way. They say they take it very seriously. They set up a high-level committee to investigate it. That's not dismissing it. Not at all. I mean, Yadav lost a job. He was fired. Why was he fired? If he's innocent, who's saying he's innocent? They're saying he may be a hero. He was acting in his country's interest. Give him a gold watch in his retirement and thank him for his service to the nation. You can take that point of view, of course. And I've read stories from his own village where people take exactly that point of view. He's from Haryana, I believe, and the whole village is on his side. He was a hero. They shouldn't be turning on him now, but anyway. But that's another question. But I think I've made my point that there are, amazingly enough, 2 sides to this question, and India may have shot itself in the foot by breaking the law in somebody else's country, and now they got a problem. They're lucky that Trump is the president because he doesn't care much about the rule of law. So maybe they'll cut a deal and find a way out of this.
Mm-hmm. Since you have mentioned the Trump, so my next question is related to the United States only. See, the United States has long enjoyed a close partnership with Canada, but during the Trump years, there was evident tension over how to manage extremism, especially with reference to Pakistani-linked networks. And Trump also during his election campaign mentioned Canada as its 51th province or state. So basically, my question to you is that, did you observe any divergence in approach between the 2 allies when it came to diaspora militancy or security priorities? And how is Canada taking Trump's presidency?
I'm sorry, I missed the last. Could you just repeat the last part of your question? Your voice was a little fuzzy.
So basically, and the last part was that, did you observe any divergence in approach between the two allies when it came to diaspora militancy or security priorities?
Yes. There has been for many years a much more vigorous approach to Khalistani militancy in the United States than in Canada. For example, at the time of the Air India bombing, 2 weeks before the bombing, there was a knock on the door at Parmar's house, the mastermind of that plot, and it was two Secret Service agents from the United States wanting to know what he knew about this plot to assassinate Rajiv Gandhi on his visit in that same month to the United States. They were all over it. They were spying on these people. They were prosecuting these people. You know, of course, about the Air India bombing, as we call it, the Kanishka bombing in June 23rd of 1985. What about the other Air India bombing? You didn't know about that? Well, that's because it didn't happen. Why did it not happen? The second plot to bomb an Air India plane out of New York, that plot was busted by the FBI, which had cameras embedded in a hotel room, in the wall of the hotel room, and they recorded the whole meeting where the would-be masterminds of that bomb plot were recruiting a bomb maker and saying, well, yeah, there'll be some Sikhs on the flight, sure, you know, but that's the price of our revolution. We don't care if we kill some Sikhs along with everybody else. So they had a revealing insight into the ethics, or lack of them, of the Khalistan movement, and they arrested the plotters. But in Canada, even though the danger was at a much higher level because of the higher level of militancy and the higher number of militant Sikh Khalistanis in Canada, there were very clear warnings. I mean, Canadians didn't even know, and to this day, many of them don't even know that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police received a very explicit warning about an attack on Air India on that particular flight out of Toronto and Montreal, flying to Heathrow and then on to India. They had a very specific warning about how they were going to do it. They were going to try to put a bomb in either the carry-on baggage or the checked baggage on that plane. And there was only one plane a week. It was we knew which flight it would be because that was the only flight Air India had. And for years since then, by the way, the Canadian authorities said, well, we didn't know which plane it would be. Well, it was either that one or the one the week after, wasn't it? So the difference between the vigilance of the American authorities and the Canadian authorities was palpable there. That warning was put on the shelf by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They didn't even tell the intelligence service, CSIS, Canadian Security Intelligence Service. They didn't even tell them. And they complained, the Indians again, they're always complaining about security, and they want more security for free. Yeah. And they were just bored. They didn't pay any attention. They put that warning on the shelf. And in the United States, they took it much more seriously.
So why is this reason behind Canada underestimating the threat posed by diaspora extremism? Because ultimately it will harm their own national security and internal social cohesion. I mean, you just told us the difference between the US approach and the Canada approach.
Yeah, it's very strange because in Canada, it should have been the other way around because of the vigilance, because of the surrounding Sikh society that knew who the militants were and basically hated them because of the suspicion that they brought on the whole community, the destruction of the community, the beatings and the violence and the other crimes, to include financial crimes and drug dealing and money laundering and people smuggling, human smuggling. that were committed in the name of the Khalistan cause, you would expect that the Canadians would have been more on the watch, not less. But remember that the intimidation tactics employed in Canada were quite vicious and quite effective. Tara Singh Hare was a publisher of the Indo-Canadian Times, this little newspaper, a little weekly newspaper in Surrey, British Columbia. And he overheard basically a confession by one of the bombers of Air India and told the police, which is a very brave thing to do, because he didn't trust the police. He knew how the police were taking a relaxed attitude. The Canadian police knew nothing about international terrorism. This was 1985. You didn't have people having to take off their shoes at security when they take a plane. Those were much more relaxed times. They didn't get it. They didn't feel the danger. Number one. Number two, the intimidation tactics used by the Khalistanis were effective. A friend of mine, Balraj Diyal, was attacked again before the bombing because he had spoken up for a friendship agreement, the Longowal Agreement. He had spoken up for friendship between Sikh and Hindu in Canada, and we must cut back the violence. He was on the platform. He formed a committee of Sikhs and Hindus with the slogan, "Give peace a chance." And because of that, he was attacked and beaten by 5 young guys with baseball bats. And he was very lucky to live. He only had 1 unbroken limb left. And he was nearly killed. Ujjal Dosanjh was nearly killed when he spoke against it. So there were many others who did not speak because of this, and you can hardly blame them. But I started by mentioning Tara Singh Hare. He had the goods. First, he hinted at it. He basically said what he knew in a roundabout way in his newspaper publicly. And he gave statements to the RCMP, and he gave them statements on videotape, sworn affidavits about what he had heard, what he knew about the plot, which was plenty. And first, there was a bomb at his office. He was unharmed. Then there was a shooting, and he was in a wheelchair for the last 10 years of his life. But they knew that he was going to be a witness against him. The terrorists knew that he was going to be a witness. He had made that clear. He was going to speak up, and they didn't get him in the first shooting. He lived, and he got home one day in his specially designed automobile so he could use the brakes with his hands because he couldn't work his feet anymore because of the first shooting. And then the second shooting, they shot him dead. So, no witnesses. That's what happened if you were a witness. And there were other witnesses, of course, who did not speak because they didn't want to end up like he did. So you can say it's not a good explanation. People should have been more brave. There should have been more who were ready to speak up. But those who were brave enough, they were also silenced in many cases.
I'm so sorry. So sorry what happened to your friend and what happening to other brave Canadians who are speaking against this madness. This brings us to our next question. It is regarding the Canadian politics only, sir. Sir, as you have mentioned about what Khalistanis did to witnesses. So, despite growing public concern over extremism and rising tensions in Canada-India relations, Conservative Party of Canada failed to form government in 2025 federal election, falling short even after gaining ground in vote-rich Ontario. In your view, what explains this outcome? Has diaspora vote bank politics reshaped the strategic calculations of mainstream Canadian parties, particularly when it comes to issues like transnational extremism and foreign policy?
I didn't get all of that question. Summarize it again. I want to make sure I answer that question.
Okay. So, sir, my question is, despite growing public concern over extremism and rising tensions in Canada-India relations, the Conservative Party of Canada failed to form government in the 2025 federal elections, falling short even after gaining ground in vote-rich Ontario. In your view, what explains this outcome? Has diaspora vote bank politics reshaped the strategic calculations of mainstream Canadian parties, particularly when it comes to issues like transnational extremism and foreign policy?
We've touched on this a bit already, because it's a difficult thing to explain why the Canadian political system has been so accommodating. People are, it is quite common. If you take the position that I do, for example, I'm writing and speaking about these problems for many years now in Canada, it is completely normal in my life for me to be called a racist, because they say that to criticize the Khalistanis' violence is to be anti-Sikh. And if you're anti-Sikh, that's because you're a racist. And it is quite normal for people to be so condemned, even, for example, in the Liberal Party. It was then the ruling party, and it still is, as you point out, today. For even, I mean, this really happened. If you think this is very strange, this is even stranger, what I'm going to tell you now. A born in Punjab lawyer who became a Canadian and became a Liberal MP, his name is Ramesh Sangha, noticed that some of his fellow Liberal members of Parliament were Khalistanis. Not just Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, a left-wing party, a different party. I'm talking about the Liberal Party, the ruling party in Canada, as it then was and still is. And he denounced them. He spoke up. And he wasn't beaten, but he was kicked out of the party. He was kicked out of the Liberal caucus. He was not allowed to be a Liberal MP anymore. He was booted out. And although he was born and raised in Punjab and a Sikh, he was called a racist by a white Liberal MP who was an officer of the Liberal caucus, sort of in command of MPs' movements and voting behavior in the House of Commons. So the white guy called the brown guy a racist because the brown guy was against terrorism. So if that could happen to him, imagine what happens to those of us who have the misfortune to be white. I mean, this is a real thing that really happened in Canada. He's no longer an MP. He was kicked out. And I mean, guess who? I told you about the petition that was raised in the House of Commons by Sue Dollywall from Surrey, and how few votes that he got. But there was only one MP in that case who had insults shouted at him in the hallways of the House of Commons. It wasn't the Khalistanis. It was Ramesh Sangha, and it was Chandra Arya. It was those who stood against violence. They were the ones who got yelled at and insulted. Now, this I acknowledge, does nothing to answer your question. Well, how does this happen? But people are scared in Canada of being called racists, even when it's wrong, even when they can show how absurd it is. To be against terrorism doesn't seem to me to be, there's nothing racist about it. But I think this is a partial explanation. I'm not doing Canada any favors by painting it in these colors, but it is not unusual for people to shy away. They don't want to say anything that might be interpreted the wrong way if they they say, well, everyone should have their own right to self-determination under the UN Charter. So we mustn't interfere with the rights of the Kurds or the Palestinians or the Sikhs if they want to campaign for their own country. Far be it from us to interfere. And then you say, well, yeah, but what about the violence? Well, you know, they say that Parmar didn't do it. They say the Indian government did it. And now we've come back to why they try to keep that lie going. It's in order to keep people like you and people like me asking the questions that you're asking. How do they get away with this? And that's in part how they get away with it, by embarrassing people who don't know any better, saying, well, you know, the Indian government is engaged in an ongoing genocide. I'm quoting Gopatwant Singh Panun, an ongoing genocide, his words, of the Sikhs. And nobody ever seems to, you know, it's a long way away from Canada. They don't know anything about Punjab, and they don't seem to realize that, you know, 95% of the Sikhs in Punjab, where most of the world's Sikhs live, are very strongly pro-national, pro-Indian nationalists who are proud to be Indian and tell pollsters that. 95% in one poll by Pew Research said they are very proud to be Indian. They're not separatists at all. But they have cultivated a myth in Canada that any Sikh is automatically a Khalistani. It's nonsense, but that's what many people believe in Canada. I forgive me if I didn't directly address your question, because part of it I didn't hear right, but I think we're talking about the same strange phenomenon, aren't we?
Yes, I think in general, like, people hate those who speak truth to power everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like this politics of cancel culture and this politics of labeling anyone racist, this, that, like, it's quite unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, the classic example was, I mean, the dynamic that underpinned the last government, less so the new government. In the last Liberal government, as you know, it was a minority that was propped up by the votes of the leftist New Democratic Party, led by Jagmeet Singh, a person with strong Khalistani sympathies. And when he was first elected as the leader of the party, which gave its votes to keep the Liberals in power, when he won the leadership of the party, I happened to be doing the political show that week, and I asked him on air 5 times if he would denounce or disapprove of the glorification of Talvinder Singh Parmar, Canada's worst mass murderer. And he wouldn't do it. He would not do it. And immediately after the interview ran, and after there was a bit of a hullabaloo about it, his response was that Terry Milewski was a racist. So that's how it works.
Yes, sir. Your fight for truth and your fight against lie reminded me of this quote, which is in the Chernobyl. It says, "Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. What is the cost of lies?" Yes. So this reminded me, like, ultimately the cost, like, politicians who are lying to themselves and the lies spread by Khalistanis, it will harm the innocent people at the end only.
Yes. And I mean, it's very hard to fight something. In part, you're fighting ignorance. Remember that, I mean, I'm very critical of Canada's response and its failure to provide justice, or some measure of justice, to the families of the victims of terrorism by Khalistanis in the 1980s, principally. But remember that for most Canadians, this was off their radar. This was a terrorist attack against people they didn't know. A plane went down in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Ireland. There weren't many pictures. There was nobody famous on the plane. There were no Hollywood stars on the plane. They didn't really identify with the victims. And, oh, well, they were basically Indians. And the Prime Minister of Canada at the time, Brian Mulroney, picked up the phone to call Rajiv Gandhi and offer condolences to India for the deaths of what actually were Canadian citizens. They weren't, but they were thought of as foreign, Indian. And a lot of people have asked this question, rightly, I believe, and it's unanswerable, whether Canada's investigation and response to this terrible act of terrorism, the worst act of terrorism in world history until 9/11, Canada's feeble response, that it may have had something to do with the racial origin of the people on board. And that it might have been different if there had been a lot of white people from Toronto. We can't say. We don't know. We can suspect. That's all. But we're not alone in having that suspicion. Let's put it that way.
One more question on India-Canada relations. So, Anita Anand, a cabinet minister of Indian origin, was recently appointed as Canada's foreign minister. Do you see this as a strategic move to manage India-Canada fallout? Could her Indian roots and perceived pro-India stance influence the direction of Canadian diplomacy?
Well, the short answer is yes. I don't think it can hurt. It's going to make a difference. But mainly it's going to make a difference because of the other circumstances. Number one, both parties are fed up with the dispute. They don't want their entire relationship between two large democracies, the largest and physically the largest in Canada. They don't want that to hijack the entire relationship. Why, why does everything have to be thrown out because of this dispute over the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar? Second, Trudeau is gone. There was no way that Trudeau and Modi were ever going to make a deal. If they ever spoke to each other again, I'd be surprised. There was no way, they did not, those two were not going to get along. But it's not about two parties. This is about three parties. The United States is also a party. They also have an indictment against the Indian government. They haven't withdrawn it yet. And Trump's been in power more than 100 days, and he hasn't trampled on that yet. But I think he will. So what I think is going to happen, not thanks to Anita Anand, she will let it all happen. But what I think is going to happen is that a deal will be struck, especially with Mr. Trump. If somebody ever talks to him about it, he'll just say, "Oh, we'll cut a deal with the Indians, whereby our indictment of an Indian former RAW agent will somehow go away. Department of Justice will throw it away. And in return, we'll get something good from India on tariffs. And it'll have nothing to do with ethics or morality or the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar." Meanwhile, the Canadians want to move on. They have new leadership, which is more technocratic. They're not as sort of devoutly liberal as Trudeau. Mark Carney is going to say, well, yeah, if there is a deal to be had here, which produces a rewarming of relations with India, and we have diplomats returning on both sides, which they're already talking about. I believe the paper's already being filed for a new high commissioner from the Indian side to Canada, and probably the same in the other direction. I think that this deal will be welcomed by all three parties, and that if Canada doesn't like doing a deal that does away with what it thinks would be justice for the family of poor Mr. Nijjar, that Canada will go along with it anyway, because they're the junior partner in this trio. It would be just crazy at this point, I believe. Not that crazy things happen don't happen in politics, but I think it would be crazy for Prime Minister Carney to come along now and say, well, India wants to make a deal to make this all go away and sweep it under the table. And they will pretend to send Vikram Yadav to prison, and after a while, he'll quietly be let out. Might want to make a deal. The Americans might want to make a deal. I'm sure they will. And if Canada says no, well, so what? They won't care if Canada says no. They'll go ahead anyway. So if he can piggyback on that deal, if he can maintain his intelligence sharing agreement that Canada has with the Five Eyes, as you know, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, and Canada, and the United States, if he can maintain that and restore the trading relationship, get the negotiations, which were that close to being fulfilled, on a free trade agreement with India, well, that would be a great thing. Nobody in Canada is going to say, well, Carney should have said no. He should have stood on in principle and said, no, we insist on having a trial and punishing India for its crimes on Canadian soil. I don't think so. I see them looking very carefully for a polite way out to brush this under the rug. And the sooner the better.
Yes, sir. Relations should improve between the two nations for good. Sir, we have talked a lot about Khalistan movement on Canadian soil. So now one question related to Indian Punjab. We have seen attempts to revive separatist movement inside Punjab too, especially with figures like Amritpal Singh. He won Lok Sabha election from Taran constituency. He is technically a member of parliament, but he is behind the bars. So, do you see these domestic developments as ideologically aligned with the diaspora-led Khalistan project, or are they operating on a different wavelengths?
I think it's very hard for me to say. I'm sometimes asked about this. I don't know what these people are thinking. It doesn't seem to make any sense to me. I do not see any organized Khalistan movement in what is supposed to be Khalistan. I mean, consider, for example, just look at the election figures. I mean, this is all I can do as a non-Indian at this great distance. I can look at real facts, like voting figures, for example. I use something you mentioned the article I wrote about Pakistani influence on the movement. In the last election in Punjab, Simranjit Singh Man's separatist party, the only separatist party that run, they're not proposing any violence. He wouldn't be allowed to run if he did. But he got, what, 2.5% of the vote and 0 seats. And in the one before that, in the 2017 election, he got 0.3 of 1%, a fraction of 1% of the vote, and 0 seats again. Now, this is evidence, all right? They were free to run, you were free to go and vote for them, and you didn't. People in Punjab just did not. And I also mentioned the very large survey done by Pew Research, which interviewed literally hundreds of thousands of Indians. And in the case of Punjab, they asked the question to Sikhs in Punjab. Sikhs are about 58% of the population of Punjab, as you know. So it's an overwhelming majority. And they asked them this question: are they proud to be Indian? And 95% said they were proud to be Indian. And there was a second question, and they 70% of them said that anyone who does not respect the nation of India is not a real Sikh. 70% went that far. They don't even consider you a Sikh, a fellow Sikh, if you have this Khalistani philosophy. Now, I think that those facts, and many like them, that's pretty good to persuade outsiders like me that I don't see. Amritpal Singh and his little band of goons and his success in his election campaign, despite being incarcerated at the time, I don't think anyone in Punjab is thinking of him as the chief minister. I mean, it's an interesting story. It makes news for reporters like me and you, but it's not real. There's no prospect of any kind of, nobody in Punjab is serious about entertaining an independence movement. It's only alive among people who, in large numbers, haven't been to India for the last generation. They may not be able to get visas. They've been on blacklists for years. They missed the family weddings and the births of their cousins and other relatives in India for years. They don't know what's going on there. And they have this idea, or they pretend to have this idea, because it makes them the big man at the Gurdwara. It makes them, it gives them some reason to strut. It gives them street credibility, as we call it. Street cred is what gangsters call it, to make it seem like they are the tough guys and they claim to be the voice of the Sikhs. Well, I think the numbers that I mentioned knock a big hole in that argument.
And also in India, whenever these Khalistanis living in foreign countries, they publish the map of Khalistan, Indian people and Sikhs in general, they're quick to point out why you never include Lahore in the map of Khalistan, which was the original capital of Maharaja Ranjit Singh.
Well, they always mention Maharaja Ranjit Singh because, 200 years ago, that was the seat. That was the center of the Sikh empire that they now wish to emulate. So they will invariably tell you, if you get into an argument with a Khalistani, I've had a few, as you can imagine, they will invariably mention the Sikh empire. 200 years ago, we governed ourselves. Why can't we do it again? Okay, so I don't see your claim. What about Nankana Sahib? That's only the birthplace of Guru Nanak, and you're not claiming that. You're not claiming Lahore. There are half a dozen holy places that are central, fundamental to Sikh culture in Pakistan, and they're not claiming any of them. At least be intellectually consistent. And now Panoon says that the capital city of the new Khalistan is going to be Shimla. Really? So this is of important, great significance to the Sikhs. For what reason exactly? I don't know. I think that it is. There's an expression that this story has jumped the shark, and it's got to do with an old sitcom on American television from years ago. But the meaning of it is that it's long past its sell-by date, that it has gone beyond being funny. Now it's just ridiculous. Now it's a waste of time. Now it makes no sense. And for that matter, if Punjab, the traditional territory of the Sikh empire, is seriously to be contemplated by a devout Khalistani, we're going to have to deal with the hostility of the people of Pakistan, who so far as I think have defaced the statue of Ranjit Singh about 4 times. It knocked his head off. It's just, there's no prospect that Pakistan, they've, as I've said, have supported the Khalistan movement, as long as it's over there. They're not supporting any Khalistan movement inside the borders of modern Pakistan. That is definitely out of the question. So I think it's dead, except as a form of perverse entertainment and a vehicle for fundraising for Khalistanis in Canada, Australia, Britain, Germany, some in Italy, and New Zealand. Don't forget New Zealand as well. There's a horrific case of some militants who set upon a popular podcaster by the name of Harnack Singh in New Zealand. They attacked him with knives because he was saying the wrong thing about Sikh fundamentalists in New Zealand, and they attacked him with knives and nearly cut him to pieces. They just about butchered him in his own driveway and went to jail for many years around about the end of last year. So it's extended all over the world to these very small communities. But remember that number that I mentioned before about the petition to try to blame the Indian government for the Air India bombing. They got 4,000 votes in a nation of 40 million people. 4,000 votes when all you had to do was sit on your backside and click yes online. And so they got about 1% of the Sikh population of Canada. It's not real anymore. It's not real.
Sir, this brings us to our last question. Sir, your work has drawn both praise and fierce backlash. So, how have you navigated the hostility from parts of the Sikh diaspora, some of which borders on intimidation? And secondly, if you were advising Western democracies, especially Canada, what reforms, legislative or institutional, would you recommend to ensure that freedom of speech is not weaponized to glorify terrorism or transnational extremism causes?
Well, the answer to the second question is easy. I'll come back to the first. The answer to the second question is that I think that more powerful than having parliamentary hearings, new legislation, debates about freedom of speech, how do you craft such legislation to stop people saying bad things? Well, you can't, but you have to do something. Rather than that, I would just prefer to keep it very simple, so simple that we could do it tomorrow. And that is for all the party leaders, left, right, and middle, and Quebecois, for all of them to say, our members are not going to go anymore to your Vaisakhi Day parade if you are going to have celebrations of the murder of Indira Gandhi, or General Vaidya, or Bayant Singh, or the Air India victims, all 331 of them. If you're going to pretend that the Indian government, we're not going to have anything to do with you. And if you think that you're going to compel us to sing your song because of the fear that you will go and organize votes against us, go ahead. If you think you can win that way, go ahead. But we don't think you can. We think that our opponents in the Conservative or the New Democratic Party or the Parti Québécois or whoever it is, we think that we all are going to resist. We're none of us going to have anything to, in other words, the power of denunciation. That is equal and immediate, and you don't have to have a debate and legislation and knock a big hole in Canada's freedom of speech. Just say, you go ahead, you have your freedom of speech, but we're not going to pay any attention. Every time you say that Parma is a great hero, we shall say that you are endorsing violence and you have no place in Canadian politics. Your first question was, how do you deal with pressure and unpleasantness, shall we say? I've had my share, it's true. One of the early ones was, it's time to find out where Milewski lives and put his head on a stick. And there was another one, more recently, there was one built around a very interesting story, actually, about the murder. This was before Blue Star, before the Golden Temple, of the murder of Lala Jagat Narayan, who was a famous politician, newspaper publisher, a journalist, who denounced Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale back in the late 70s and early 80s. And he was murdered by Bhindranwale's goons, two of them. And so it was quite a famous assassination in the history of this matter in Punjab. And so some clown in the UK, a British, actually a Scottish Sikh, tweeted that in Punjabi, we say Lala Jagat Narayan, but in English we say Terry Milewski, warning me that I will face the same fate, supposedly. But he didn't realize, it hadn't occurred to him that if you put something like that on Twitter, people will notice and people will object and people will make a fool of you. And so they did, and it ended well. And he deleted that tweet and changed his handle. My point is that they have a hard time getting a hearing, harder than I do, whereas they make me, by their actions, not, I won't say invulnerable, but I will say that, put it this way, if something were to happen to me, everybody would know who did it. It wouldn't be a big secret because they've been making it public for 30 years, just about. So that I am more protected than some anonymous Air India witness, two of whom I could name, but I'm not allowed legally to name them. I could not legally tell you their names, who are now living in hiding and in fear that if they say anything, they will be in trouble and that they may be attacked. But they don't have the advantage that I have of notoriety. I don't have much to worry about because people know me and they know who might want to kill me. But for most people who are worried about that topic, they don't have the same notoriety and the same protection that I have. Namely, that you'd be pretty dumb to go after me because everyone would know it was you.
Still, it is not easy to sustain that much pressure from a hostile minority who are very tyrant and have killed so many people. But you have faced them bravely over the years, and this inspires young journalists like us to speak truth to power and just keep doing your work and say and write what is right.
Yeah, they're afraid of you too.
Yes, thanks, sir. So, sir, I think this brings an end to our interview. Sir, thank you so much for your time and candor. Your work has shed critical light on the global Khalistan movement, its violent origins, foreign sponsorship, and troubling entrenchment in diaspora politics. By tracing how a separatist cause has morphed into a transnational project with real diplomatic and security consequences, you have challenged policymakers to confront difficult questions about free expression, extremism, and geopolitical manipulation. As diaspora activism continues to shape global discourse, your investigative reporting stands as an essential resource for those seeking to understand the nexus between extremism, statecraft, and democratic resilience. So thanks a lot for giving us your time, sir. It means a lot to us.
Well, I enjoyed it. Those are good questions. Send me a link to whatever you put on the internet, whatever you do with it. Send me a link. I'll take a look. So thank you for calling.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving us your time, and have a great day ahead and have a great life ahead. You still look very healthy and vibrant.
Thank you. So bye for now.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.